He's indeed surrounded by Bibberbang. The spores of those mushrooms are both toxic and flammable.
Baldur's Gate 3, the newest game from Larian Studios, developers of the Divinity series, who have been in business since 1996, and have had decent past successes, but nothing even close to Baldur's Gate 3. As most reviews have already shown, the general consensus of the game is it's pretty much one of the best RPGs ever made. I want to start by saying, as of writing this video, not accounting for recording footage or more casual play, I have clocked in about 184 hours as of August 29th. So, yes, I like the game. A lot. I'm not going to discuss much of what the game does well because there's honestly like a billion other people already doing that. So when it's relevant, I'll mention something that they did really well. But for the most part, my focus here is to point out where I think the game kind of falters. Again, no, none of my issues are any of the quote-unquote woke garbage nonsense. In my group playthrough, our face looks like this and did his best to bang both Halsin and Will, but ditched Will as soon as he wasn't down for a threesome. To avoid spoiling any given act, I'm going to divide this video into the various acts of the game. That way, if you want to avoid something, it'll be easy enough to do. I also really want to discuss the cut content from the game, which I'll admit is going to be the part that might age the worst. But I'm going to focus on the stuff that I would pretty much bet money that they're never going to add back in. Larian has restored cut content in the past, yes, but mostly they focus on fixing broken stuff and adding in cut content that gels with the base game. They normally don't do DLC, but with the dollar signs they saw with Baldur's Gate 3, they have said now that it's on the table for discussion. So it could be that things that were originally not going to be added back in make their way back as DLC. That'll all be well and good, but I'm still going to focus on the game as is at launch and with the first few patches. I feel like it's fair to discuss the game they gave to us before fixing it, in the same way it's fair to judge the launch of No Man's Sky versus the polished version. I know, it sounds harsh, and I don't mean to be that harsh. It's just, I wanted to pick something that was actually playable on launch, unlike one of my other favorite games of all time. Being real, the best comparison would be Knights of the Old Republic 2, but come on, can you imagine being the sort of boomer whose formative years were set during the early 2000s? Cringe, am I right, fellow kids? Really, what is there to say? Having had the longest to cook out of any of the acts thanks to early access, it's by far the most polished and put together out of every part of the game. This act is where everyone began discussing it as Game of the Year, and it's easy to see why. The pacing of content is amazing. The Druid Grove and the Goblin Camp are both really interesting locations with tons of stuff to do. What I love the most is that the game lets you get totally lost, and yet there's always something to find in that direction. Not just something to do, but a lot of times I would just stumble across a quest line I had no idea even existed. Out of everywhere in the first act, I think the Blighted Village is probably my favorite, both because you can interact with the goblins regardless of which side you choose.
Surround him like!
But between the windmill, the bang barn, and the eloquent ogres,
Am I not astonishing?
it's just packed with stuff.
Go on. My time.
It was also my and probably a lot of people's first discovery about the Underdark in the game, so it definitely gets points there. I avoided the early access gameplay because I really didn't want to be spoiled. So I had no idea going in that that was even there. Kind of reminded me of Elden Ring when I first discovered the Underground. As for my criticisms, really with Act 1 there are only two. Firstly, I think it's too long, which I know sounds weird, just hear me out. I think the sheer scope of Act 1 compared to the others really makes it feel like the other acts are a lot shorter and less polished. I'll get more into the specifics later, but I would have preferred the Underdark to be moved to Act 2, mostly to help break up the overall samey feel of the overworld Shadowfell, while still maintaining the holy shit moment of discovering the Underdark, when you see stuff like the phase spiders in the Blighted Village, which hint at a much larger scope underneath. The other issue I have with Act 1 is honestly much harder to justify. Minthara inciting with the goblins. Ignoring the early issues with Minthara's dialogue being bugged so tons of it just won't trigger. As of patch 3, which is when I'm recording this, it's still not working. They make a point of showing that Minthara was pretty much just brainwashed by the Absolute when you side with her, Though, being a Drow, she is still evil, but significantly less so. So there being no option to knock her out, capture her, any of the sort really feels like a waste, especially because I really did love the interactions that actually did work for me. But even if Minthara was the best companion you got in any RPG ever, there's still the huge problem that comes with siding with the goblins.
Now, lie down.
You lose 3 companions, all the tieflings are dead, and you don't even get Minthara until midway into Act 2. As a result, you lose out on a ton of companion content. To me, the worst part is losing the tieflings with just how many quests they're tied to through the whole game. Just a few things you're missing out on: merchants, quest lines, lots of character interactions, potential allies for the final act, and just a general sense that your actions matter. If the game let you, say, recruit some of the goblins, like Saza, or had some hang around the camp, just anything, it would have felt significantly less barren. It screams to me that very early on in development, they had this cool idea of having 2 distinct ways to end the conflict, but they really only invested in the druid route, leaving the goblin route to just sort of starve. I feel like all of the pieces are there to make a truly interesting experience with the goblin route. They had plenty of named NPCs with unique personalities, not even mentioning the literal thirsty Drow in Act 2 who I could easily have seen join your evil party. They just completely dropped the ball in the evil route in regards to giving you actual content. And I know that Drusy do slap, but not even a degenerate such as myself can justify a full run just because of how much you lose. The Shadowfell has kind of a weird place in D&D lore. It's a newer edition, but because of how it functions, everyone just sort of has to pretend like it's always been there, which, considering it looks like this, I just find that really funny. Regardless, I really do like it as a concept, and I think the aesthetics were really nailed in this game. The shadows were simple, but do a great job at making it look like it's something you really don't want to be walking through. All that said, fuck the lantern mechanic. I know, this Shadowfell's dangerous, but with the pathfinding being what it is, where several times I would be trying to move slow and someone would get stuck on a piece of geometry so they'd get out of the lantern and everything would be forced into a pause state and then I just have to slowly walk them over to me. No, I never had to reload, but it was really just annoying. Personally, I was really lucky that I discovered the fairy and the lantern on my first playthrough completely blind, but in my evil run where I let the Drider live, fuck that. I felt like they really just didn't sell the danger of the Shadowfell with the in-game mechanics. This is where my desire to move the Underdark over really comes into play. I really would have preferred if there were just sections you straight up couldn't cross. This would go with people saying that there are some areas too dark that no amount of protection will help you. They could have literally made that the case where you just have impassable sections and then you have to reroute into the Underdark to get around them. This would both break up the kind of samey look of the Shadowfell, but anyone who knows anything about Forgotten Realms lore knows that the Underdark is a terrible place. So having it be the preferable option would have really driven home that the Shadowfell was that oppressive. Really, my favorite parts of the Shadowfell were easily the weird little dudes in Ketheric. They added a lot of life into this act, and I'm a sucker for weirdos being weird. Ketheric is by far the strongest villain in the game. J.J. Simmons knocked it out of the park, but he is also the only one of the Dead 3 that I ever felt was a real threat. I also really did like Moonrise and Char's Temple, both of which were really cool to explore and had a lot of neat little interactions. Balthazar specifically being, well, this extra, is one of my favorite parts of the game. My evil route, it was really neat that you could allow Balthazar to take the Night Song, which gets you a meeting with Ketheric, and you can even pray to the Absolute. My issue with this route is you lose another companion, bringing the total up to 4, so even more content is lost, not even mentioning that it's Shadowheart and she's more tied into anything in the game than anyone. But it also doesn't make any sense in character. Ketheric has been shown to be immortal, and, the Absolute is literally right there. So letting him have that many allies isn't even good RP. It's just stupid. This is a perfect example of what I really wish they did more of. Back in Act 1 with the Gith Crash, I loved how if you taunted Vlaakith, she just straight up killed you. It was really shocking, but really fucking funny. I feel like this game should 100% let us make the dumbest possible choice, but I really wish it just killed us in more entertaining ways. They really did have plenty of chances to do when not murdering Balthazar, such as letting him actually turn you into a weird undead and that being a game over. So many of these choices are just awful and are still designed to funnel you into the same scenes, which is really way more obvious in Act 2 and 3 than it was in 1. I don't have any issue with freedom of choice, but only if every choice is going to get me a satisfying amount of content. After Act 1, I really feel that's where Baldur's Gate 3 tends to struggle the most. They want to let us have the freedom of choice, but rarely will have a decent amount of content for the non-correct route. It is totally unreasonable to expect fully branching stories with a game this size, so please only focus on the more interesting things. Give us more dead ends. People eat that shit up. If you've ever heard about an anime visual novel, I guarantee you it's only because it had a funny dead end that someone wanted to talk about. To clarify, I really did love Act 2. Ketherick was perfect, Aelin was great, and the avatar of Merkel was far and above my favorite fight in the game. It was peak of what these sorts of games, to me, are really great for, letting you live that power fantasy by fighting the good fight against odds that should otherwise be impossible. Which, considering you go from fighting the avatar of a god to, let's solve a murder mystery, gang, it feels kinda incoherent. Plus, both Gortash and Orin being way less impressive than Ketherick, from a mix of cut content and just not really being as well written, doesn't help the matter. I want to give 2 examples for those new to CRPGs, because I know Baldur's Gate 3 is many people's first. Let's look at the fight against Merkel as the peak moment of the game. Even if you disagree, just roll with me. Despite how much I loved it, it didn't give me that heart-pumping, spine-tingling level of awesome that is present in one of my favorite CRPGs of all time and one of my favorite RPGs, Pathfinder: Wrath of the Righteous. I'm going to avoid getting into specifics. It's a CRPG made by Owlcat in the Pathfinder system, which itself is a follow-up to 3rd edition 3.5 of D&D. This game is set near a place called the World Wound. It is a massive scar upon the land that connects the material plane to the abyss, which is where demons come from. For context, in Baldur's Gate 3, Avernus is part of the Hells, which is where devils are from. Devils are lawful, demons are chaotic. Like Baldur's Gate 3, in Wrath, you don't know who you are or where you came from at the start. But within the first 2 minutes of the game, you go from being at a festival to the Lord of Locusts, Discari, making his entrance. He invades and kills the ancient silver dragon, protecting the city in a single brutal strike. The game gives you a choice: do you run, do you fight? But either way, Discari slashes the ground in half and you find yourself in the caves beneath the city. From this point, the game has you do your absolute best to survive. Demons can freely teleport to anywhere that doesn't have what's called a ward stone, which were initially devices given by angels to mortals to help combat the demons. After a bit of travel, you pretty quickly encounter a demon named Minago. She is currently the one primarily working to destroy the ward stone, which marks the beginning of the end. At this point, you're level 2. This is so far out of your grasp that even survival seems like a fool's errand. When you finally come across the ward stone, you find Minago there, attempting to destroy it. Knowing this means the death of all of you, you draw your weapons and fight. It isn't even close. With a single wave of her hand, she drops your entire party. You wake up alive, but defeated. The wardstone hasn't been broken yet, but at this point you must find a way to stop them. If you don't, it's over. You spend time roaming around the war-torn city, finding allies, becoming stronger, learning about the demons and their plan. All of this culminates in your second confrontation with Minago. You beat her to the wardstone, and as you reach out to touch it, you feel the strife she's been taking advantage of, and you learn how the wardstones work. Angels from the heavens made a deal to be bound inside. The demonic influence has driven some of them to madness. This conflict between the corrupt and the pure is the chip in the armor that the demons have been exploiting. Whatever your choice to resolve the situation, You are flooded with a mysterious power that pulses outward in a golden light. Minago then arrives. Then, well... This is really the first of many examples in this game that really get the power fantasy. And while it's not nearly as graphically impressive as Baldur's Gate 3, nor having anywhere near the amount of voice acting, I feel like it's a great example of an actual ton of freedom of choice where the various major story beats, save for a few, are greatly altered depending on your choices. The other example is significantly shorter and technically far more related. See, game developers all over the world have been chasing a very few specific things over the years. In this case, two characters that have made such an impact in their respective time that everyone wants to capture that lightning in the bottle just one more time. The first being Kreia from Knights of the Old Republic 2, who's a Grey Jedi, and was honestly one of the best parts of that game. But the other is from Baldur's Gate 2. The main antagonist is John Aranicus. Yes, I know. Someone named John in a setting like this seems goofy, which I think is why everyone just calls him Aranicus. He's introduced right at the start of the game, and between his writing, personality, and killer voice actor, it's been the white whale for writers ever since, because his entrance is... just look at this.
Ah, the child of Baal has awoken. It is time for more experiments. The pain will only be passing. You should survive the process.
Chills every time. This is, it's a mess. There's no two ways about it. Coming off the high of killing this bastard, the first thing most people encounter is refugees attempting to not get kicked out of where they're staying. There's an extended plot about toys rigged to explode, a circus clown corpse treasure hunt, and your first proper meeting with the remaining dead three. None of these are objectively bad, and there's no reason not to have some form of cooldown period after that high. It's such a whiplash. When you add to that, when you do finally get to Baldur's Gate, it's just the lower city. For being the end goal of, like, every NPC you encountered and almost every quest in the game, and factoring in about how Sven talked about an explorable upper city weeks before launch, the cut content comes to a head here. People who are nobility all have to exist in the lower city when, by all accounts, they shouldn't even be here. Gortash, we just have to take it as word for how big and powerful he is, because where he had that influence was taken out of the game, which means his coronation takes place in a fort on a bridge, which admittedly is about as classy as Gortash looks, but still kind of feels lame. Orin and all of the many shapeshifters I feel is a direct callback to the shapeshifters from the old game, where, like, every fifth person was one, and when a party member and or child gets kidnapped, that's also, I think, a direct callback to Baldur's Gate 2 with the vampires. Orin works well enough, but it's missing something. And I don't know exactly what, but to me, I feel like there either needed to be more content with her, or she needed to be something more than just crazy murder hobo. The fight with her as Dark Urge specifically was really cool, but, like, compared to Ketherick, I could never really take her or Gortash seriously. Speaking of Orin, the next point will only really make sense if you played Baldur's Gate 1 and or 2, so I'll try and explain it and elaborate on the Forgotten Realms deep lore. Saravok was the main villain of Baldur's Gate 1, who reappeared at the end of 2. You had the option, Throne of Baal, expansion of Baldur's Gate 2, to turn him good if you treated him like a decent person. I am fine with the canon being he is not a good person, and just kind of tries to return to his old self, but it doesn't make any sense at all that he's still alive. Orin, Saravok, and the Dark Urge are Baal spawn, which harken back to the event known as the Time of Troubles. What kicked off this event was Bane and Merkel stealing the Tablets of Fate from the overgod Owl. These are tablets that are very vaguely defined at best, but generally the purpose is to keep the natural forces of law and chaos in check. Beyond their MacGuffin status, they're fairly unimportant to the actual world. Ao is the boss of all gods. Think if the Greek gods answered to the Christian god as an overseer, but he's also unknown to mortals before this point and fades from memory and written records after the Time of Troubles is over. After the tablets are stolen, the Overgod calls all of the gods to council and asks who stole the tablets. When no one steps forth, he becomes angry. The theft is the last straw of godly mischief, and he strips all of the gods except for Helm, lawful neutral god of guards and loyalty, of their divine powers. This forces them to all live as a singular one of their respective avatars. Gods are thus capable of dying because if their one avatar is killed, they just go to the afterlife. This results in a lot of the earlier AD&D gods being slaughtered. This includes Bane, Baal, and Merkel. Helm was set as a fully powered god whose only job was to guard the way back to the celestial realms. Since he was the only powerful god at the time, all divine magic stopped working unless you were within 1 mile of your god's avatar. In addition, arcane magic becomes wholly unreliable, as Mystra was also made into an avatar. Mystra was herself killed trying to get past Helm, who just straight-bodied her. Consequences be damned. My dude has a job to do. A group of adventurers, including the assassin Cyric, the paladin Kelemvor, and the wizard Midnight, end up solving the plot in a series of novels whose quality I will not vouch for, and a trio of pre-made adventures that are pretty mid. With things mostly set right, Cyric then steals the domains of Baal, Bane, and Merkel to become the super god of evil, because he's a dick. But he's also not very smart. He accidentally hits himself with his own brainwashing super artifact and loses most of his domains. Kelemvor becomes Judge of the Dead, and Midnight becomes the new Mystra. And as far as I'm aware, Torm, the minor god of paladins, whose main claim to fame was being worshipped by Keldorn from Baldur's Gate 2, and one of the best paladins in any game ever, Fight Me, died and was brought back to life by Ao, because he knew that Torm died following his convictions. While all the others that died were in petty power grabs, Torm died fighting the avatar of Bane. For his actions, he was not only resurrected, but made into a lesser deity. So for Baal to be back, which he clearly is, Saravok could not be alive. Like, literally. It wouldn't be possible. At the end of Throne of Baal, if you don't redeem him and you choose to reject godhood, which is the canon ending, Saravok jumps on the chance and you have to kill him. The only way he survives is if you redeemed him and you reject godhood. I know they wanted to bring him back because they're fans of the original and his armor is awesome, but just having him vibing in the sewers as a high-ranking Baal cult member really doesn't make sense. The blood women around him are 3 of the Baal spawn from Throne of Baal, and them being there is fine since it's not really them. And if Saravok was the same thing and this was like an eternal punishment for him failing, sure, I can work with that. But it's not. He's the real deal, and he's one of Daddy's favorites. It runs counter to the point of the original games, where once Baal was dead, rather than try to become his vessel for resurrection, almost every single Baal spawn immediately went, fuck Dad, and tried to take his seat of power for their own. While some of the side quests were fun in Act 3, a large chunk boiled down to, we'll help you in the final battle, which, don't get me wrong, I love when games reward you with that, but so many it's just a conversation and that's it. I don't know. With everyone talking about how it was going to be this huge RPG city, yet it just ended up as a glorified quest hub, which is kind of a letdown. The most exciting thing I've ever done in Act 3 was in my group playthrough, where Gortash's Hot Topic Sasuke-looking ass tells you that you can't touch him. His guards are just too powerful, and that we just don't have a chance to stand up to him. So, my friends and I looked at each other and went, aight, bet. 8 short rests, 3 long rests, and a few trips to Withers later, Gortash's stupid ass is buried under like 30 steel watchers. It was a ton of fun. However, this broke so many quests for us. For example, Will's dad died during the final fight, but we convinced Will to go back with his toxic ex-wife to get him back. But the game kept acting like his dad was dead when he was standing there. On top of that, the Steel Watcher factory had already exploded. There was no submarine to get to the Iron Throne, and while not the game's fault, our Durgar let the intrusive thoughts win, shot the explosive barrels Volo had been tied to, and killed the Deep Gnome. We didn't really have too many allies left at this point. The House of Hope, that was a standout for me. I thought it was immaculately well done, and again, really makes me wish they hadn't cut so much of Raphael out of the game. His boss theme is still one of the best bangers in the entire OST. Like, dude is such a Disney villain that he sings his own theme song. Real king shit. If Merkel was my favorite fight, House of Hope would be my close second. Act 3 also has what I feel is the worst, most Mass Effect 3 Star Child bullshit part. Fucking Orpheus. I freed him, especially when the Emperor had revealed that him thralling his only friend is why she acted like a stroke victim. I didn't really feel like trusting him. I figured it would be a good idea not to side with the guy who tried to mind break me. So, I free Orpheus, and at this point, I'm thinking either the Emperor would attack me and try and take the artifact, see reason when Orpheus didn't attack us, something reasonable like that. Not, join with the fucking Elder Brain! What the actual fuck is wrong with you? His argument about needing a Mind Flayer to beat the Elder Brain was already really stupid, but once he leaves, Orpheus says the same thing. Dude, your mom, your literal mom, stopped the first Mind Flayer Empire without doing that, and you have the same power as her! What is wrong with everybody? Leading up to the final encounter, the combats were really just lame. Lots of uninteresting cultists, exploding intellect devours, and devils trying to throw you off the ledge. Really, it just kind of felt like a waste of time, even with the ability to call in allies for assistance. The ending I got initially was really stupid. As of writing this, no cutscenes have been added, no ending slides, which is one of the staples of CRPGs, so not having them felt like a really bizarre choice. Just like the ending where Shadowheart says she wants a drink, Gale goes off to become a lame villain. Divinatosi slaps, I guess. Astarion, despite having one of the best emotional beats in the entire game, let alone Act 3, ends up with having a gag ending where he comically runs away from the sun. Lae'zel admittedly had a good ending by becoming the new champion of the Gith, and is the only one I felt satisfied by. Then Karlach's cut content came back to rear its ugly head, meaning we couldn't fix her. While I romanced her, Will was the one to swoop in and say, "Go to hell with me. We'll do it together." I know that it was a bug that they've already fixed, but damn it, I'm still mad. Fucking bitch. I knew I should have killed your dad. Which, also, funny enough, is another issue I had with the game. There doesn't seem to be a driving theme for the most part. I feel like this is a result of early access and people whining about some of the writing, which made Larian more cautious about making statements with their writing. The best I was able to really piece together is that there are good and bad options for everybody. The good options are pretty straightforward. Kill your parents. Shadowheart, kill your mom. Karlach, kill your dad. Astarion, kill your dad boyfriend. Lae'zel, kill your god mom. Dark Urge, kill your sister cousin and try and fight your dad. Will's the only exception, and more with him, it's about reconciling with his dad. The bad options all seem to boil down to becoming your parents or just dying. To me, the last part of the game that really feels put together, as opposed to milling around on a dock and staring at each other, is the final fight with the Elder Brain. I liked the background of being over the city a lot, and fighting the Dominated Red Dragon was a nice touch, but, there's one part that really gets to me. And that's why the Emperor is my least favorite character in the game. Aside from him really having no core personality, as in, if you trust him, he's good, if you don't, it's bad. When you start the fight against him, he summons the Guardians everyone has, including the one you made at the start of the game. Everyone reacts because they have all seen them in their dreams, despite, when you first meet the Emperor face to face, everyone is surprised by this concept as if it wasn't happening to them. This is where one of the major rewrites of the game from early access rears its ugly head, which I'm sure they had their reasons for cutting, but it lost out on what could have been one of the best parts in the game. It's finally time to talk about Daisy. To explain Daisy to people who don't know much about the early access, she was present before the Guardian. She visited you in your dreams, but instead of there being some active conflict in the astral plane, these scenes took place in a meadow near a river. Daisy would try and comfort you, talk with you, attempt to help you with your suffering. It's unclear if this was specifically just the tadpole or if it was the elder brain working through the tadpole. Either way, to get a feel of how Daisy's relationship was with you, there are two songs specifically about Daisy that are in the game. Down by the River, at character creation, and The Power during the end credits. Both of which are explicitly about her, which is why the cut content was weird to me. I think the reason she was cut is complicated, but the main factors, I believe, were player feedback and time. Early access feedback, no one trusted Daisy. And if you look at the scenes on YouTube, it makes enough sense. Sure, you got extra powers from her rather than sticking more tadpoles in your head, but there was clearly something wrong. Time-wise, I feel the later cuts to the story meant that Daisy didn't flow with how they ended up deciding how the final confrontation would go, despite the fact that everyone's personal Daisy shows up before you fight the Elder Brain, which, again, to me just shows how early that part was built out with her in mind. As for the feedback, people were rather harsh on a lot of the bold choices, things like characters being more off-putting, not sharing as much, you not knowing exactly if everyone was on the level or not. There were a lot of things that pointed to the themes of needing to build trust, extend a hand with the knowledge that you might very well get bit. Instead of trying to argue on the Emperor, as I've said, I already don't care for him, and he's less of a character and more of a plot funnel. I'm going to give my take on how I would have tried to write Daisy using the bones of what's there. As a tadpole, you have a simple goal, to infect the host and seromorphize. This rarely takes much time, and even if it's not immediate, the host loses themselves and you're in the driver's seat. But this time, something strange happens. This time, the host is able to resist. This has never happened before, and suddenly, you panic. If you can't control your host, what does that mean for your survival? Will you starve? Will you die? For a being connected to the vast mind and knowledge of the Mind Flayer Collective, the unknown holds a new level of terror to you that's beyond anything a mortal could grasp. At first, the goal is simple. Keep the host alive, prevent the fall from killing them, protect them from other psionic intrusions, but there's an issue. Because the host is autonomous, you cannot aid them against those that would do physical harm. There's a resistance that limits what you can and cannot do. And knowing how the host views you as a parasite, just reaching out would be a fool's errand. Instead, you delve into their dreams, piece together parts of their desire, creating a form most appealing. Not just a form, you weave together a personality designed to encourage them to accept you. Kind, supportive, worried. Everything something in your host situation should desire. You create a field of flowers, designed to be the sort of place your host would feel most comfortable. Lastly, you must decide on a name. Looking around, you choose from one of the features of the meadow. Daisy. Everything is perfect. Everything is set. You have accounted for all possible angles. So, why? Why do they resist? At first, you try to be understanding. Tell them it's going to be all right. When that doesn't work, you beg, plead. This isn't just about them. Your life is on the line too. Then you get angry. How dare they resist you? This host is mere ant compared to the majesty of the Illithid Empire. If they won't work with you, then they will serve you. But something's wrong. That's what you should be doing. Dominating instead of asking. Taking instead of giving. Why won't you? Why can't you? Then it dawns on you. You don't want to. All this time spent with your host. Two minds existing in the same space. Neither taking charge, but coexisting. Something about your situation has changed you. You don't want to hurt them. They still don't trust you, and for good reason. Could you blame them? So the question becomes, what to do now? Your kin will know your mind, how you feel linked to this host. Care for them. If you return to the collective, you know what happens to defectors. The host's survival is not your only concern. The host's freedom is. You can only live if they are free. So, you give them your strength. Everything you can muster. You ask for nothing in return. You don't even reach out to them in their dreams anymore. Their fate is in your hands, but only if they reach out to you. You'll do what you can to help. Give whatever they will accept. The best chance for your survival is your host. Win or lose, acceptance or rejection, your fates are intertwined. Your host has listened to what you had to say. They see your mind, your soul, as you have seen theirs. You join together in your fight against the unstoppable might of an elder brain. Death doesn't scare you anymore, but for some reason, being accepted, being seen, it's enough. Your host rejected you, and this was to be expected. After all, you're still Illithid, their mortal enemy. If your host prevails, you'll be extracted, and that will be that. If your host fails, you will be seen as a betrayer of your own. There will be no end to your pain. So despite being hated by your host, you hope they win. Death will be a mercy. It's over. They lost. Your host has fallen. Their physical form has failed, and their mind is succumbing to the elder brain. You feel the Ceramorphous beginning, but despite everything, you can't leave things like this. You take your host back to the meadow, to where you first met. Too weak to even sit up, you rest their head in your lap as you gently wipe the sweat from their brow. You speak to them from your heart. Heart? Did tadpoles have hearts? It doesn't matter. You ask them one last question. Do they want to go peacefully? You can do that. You can't free their soul. It's too late for that. But you can protect them from the elder brain. You can accept them wholly. Give them the rest they truly deserve. Make their last memory not one of failure, but of comfort, of rest. One final rest, down by the river.